continue now at the top of Daf Yomi Gemara, Mesechet Shekalim. This is Shekalim Daf 19b. The Mishnah here continues with V'shas haregel. Let's say it's during the time of the holiday that you find meat in the Gvulin. So Shahabasar Meruba, there you have a lot of meat that is around. Af Evarim Mutaros. Even if it's cut up by limbs, even if it's not cut up in smaller pieces, still you can assume it's kosher, because again at the Shas haregel there's going to be a lot of meat that is kosher that is found even outside of Yerushalayim. And the Gemara says, Lo tzorcha de lo b'harabayis kodesh. Shouldn't the Mishnah say that if you find money b'harabayis, that it's kodesh? Why are we saying that money that's found in harabayis is chulin? That doesn't make any sense. You have all kinds of money in harabayis that's kodesh, as we learned before, machatz, shekel, etc. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Ba, Rabbi Chia, b'shem Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Ba says, in the name of Rabbi Chia, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, chazaka shein hakohen motzim in halishka mos. There's a chazaka, there's a presumption that the Kohen does not take any money out of the lishka ad shehu mechalon ala behema, until he immediately takes that kedusha from the money and puts it upon a behema, so that money does become chulin, and therefore that is why the money that's found at harabayis is considered chulin. Basar shenimtza v'chulu. Then it said if you find meat in the area of the Azara, or you find this meat in Yerushalayim, so then the halacha is, regardless, you have to do ibor tzura. You have to let it become certainly noser, let it sit and become noser, and then once it becomes noser, so then you burn it. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Lazar b'shem Rabbi Hoshia, Rabbi Lazar says in the name of Rabbi Hoshia, Hisiach das, let's say you have a situation of kachim where you had hesach hadas, you weren't paying attention to it, you didn't watch it carefully, halacha is ton ibor tzura. You have to have ibor tzura, meaning again, you have to let it sit and become noser, and only then can you burn it. The halacha, the chiddush of the halacha over here is that you don't burn it immediately. Amr Rabbi Hoshia says, Masnisan Amr Kain. That's exactly what our Mishnah says. To ubar tzura, so v'yatzel beis hasreifa. It says you have to let it sit, become noser, and then you burn it. And the Gemara says, Amr Rabbi Yossi says v'yos. That's actually correct. Why? Because la'achlo ein atayachol. You can't eat the meat shemen iskalkel tzuraso, because maybe it is already noser. Lafum kain sarach meimar. Therefore, you have to say to uvar tzuraso v'yatzel beis hasreifa. Let it have ibor tzura, let it become vaday noser, and then you can burn it. The Gemara continues at the two dots, quoting the Mishnah, Nimsa b'gvulin v'chulu. The Mishnah said again, if you find meat outside of Yerushalayim in the gvulin, so then if it's cut up by evarim, you have to assume it's nevela. You have to assume that it was not shechted properly, it's not kosher. But if it's cut up into smaller pieces, then you can assume it's kosher. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Crispa b'shem Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Crispa says in the name of Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina, evarim nevelos lokin alei and mishum nevela. When we say that the evarim are considered nevela, that is considered vada nevela, and you even get malchus for that. Maybe you would have said it's a suffix nevela. No, the Reb Crispa is saying it is actually a vada nevela, and you even get malchus. And the Gemara says masnisa amrakain. It even says that in our Mishnah, evare nevelos v'chatichos mutaros. What does the Mishnah say? The evarim are nevelos and the chatichos are mutar. So chatichos mutaros lo mamish. Doesn't the Mishnah mean when it says chatichos mutaros, it means it's mamish mutar, meaning you could actually eat it. So if you're going to take that literally, so the chavasa evarim nevelos loken alein mishum nevela, then you have to say that the other line in the Mishnah where it says evarim nevelos, that it means to say that it's vada nevelos, and you even get malchus because of nevela. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Crispa b'shem Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Crispa says in the name of Rabbi Yossi b'Rabbi Chanina, im hayu macharuzos mutaros. If the meat is machruzos, then it's going to be mutter. And the Carbonada explains, im hayu machruzos means kishuro zu bezu. If the meat is tied together one to the other, mutaros, then it's mutter devadai naflu miyad adam b'shogeg. Because then already you know it fell from somebody b'shogeg, and it's going to be kosher, it's going to be mutter. And the Gemara continues, Teisha chanuyos, let's say there are 9 stores, mochros basar nevela, and all of these 9 stores sell meat that is nevela, it's not kosher. V'achas mocheres basar shchuta, and there's one store that sells basar shchuta, meat that is shechted properly. So nischalful, if a person goes into the store and purchases and doesn't remember where he purchased, so choshesh, then already he has to be suspicious that maybe he bought something that is problematic. Maybe he bought nevela. Well, the nimzis, but if a person just finds meat out in the public area, holchen achar harov, then the person follows the majority. In this particular case, 9 of the stores are selling nevela, so majority would say it's going to be a problem. What if you have the reverse case? Teisha chanuyos, mochros basar shchuta, 9 stores are selling basar shchuta, meat that is shechted properly, v'achas mocheres basar nevela, and one of them is selling meat that's nevela, that's not kosher. Nischalfulo, so again, the person bought at the store doesn't remember which one. Choshesh, the person has to be concerned. Maybe he bought the nevela. Well, the nimsus, but if the person again finds the meat the meat is out in the street, so then holchen achar arov, then he follows the majority. Again, in this case, you have the majority selling basar shchuta, so therefore you can assume that it is kosher. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Hanimsa biad nachri, let's say a person finds meat in the hands of a nachri, in the hands of a non-Jew, kinimsa beplatya, that's the same as finding it in the public square, and again, you can follow majority. If the majority of the stores are kosher, you can assume it's kosher. Rabbi Elazar bei Rabbi Chagai have a mismach l'Rabbi Mona. Rabbi Elazar was walking and he was leaning on Rabbi Mona for support. So Chama l'chad armoi mikta min susya. He saw a certain Aramean, he saw a certain non-Jew cut some meat from a horse, umapik livra, and throw it out there. So Amar Lei, so he said to him, Hadai dam Rabbi Yochanan, is this what Rabbi Yochanan meant when he said, Hanimsa biyad nachri kinimsa beplatya? If you find it in the hands of a nachri, it's like finding it in the public space. You can follow majority, you can assume it's kosher. Here we clearly see that the person is taking non-kosher meat. So he said to him, Amar Lei, he said to him, Kain Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi said it in the following situation, Vehein shero so yotze mimakulin shal Yisrael. It only applies, we only assume it's kosher if you actually see the nachri leaving the store of a Yisrael. Then you assume he bought it from the store of Yisrael, so you assume that it's kosher. And the Gemara continues with a story that seems to contradict this idea that if a non-Jew buys from a store of a Jew, we can assume that he bought kosher meat. Chad bar nosh b'tziporin. There was once a story of somebody in Tzipori, Azul boy Mizvan Kupan Mintafchi, he wanted to go to a certain butcher and buy some meat. And the butcher didn't like the guy, so he didn't give it to him. He didn't want to sell it to him. So Amar Le Lechad Romoy, so he told one of the non-Jews, he said, you go in and buy it and then give it to me, Va'isile, and that's exactly what happened. The non-Jew bought the meat and he brought it to this particular buyer. Amar Le, so then the buyer said to the seller, Lo nasvis al karche, look, I was able to get it against your will. I was able to sneak in and purchase this meat. Amar Le, so the seller said to him, V'la b'sar de nevelo, yahavisle. But guess what? I gave him basar nevela. He was a non-Jew. I didn't give him kosher meat, so you haven't succeeded in purchasing from me because you actually ended up buying basar nevela. Now the problem over here is this story seems to indicate that when a Jew sells in a kosher store to a non-Jew, we shouldn't necessarily assume he's selling kosher meat. The seller knows that the buyer is a non-Jew. The seller might give basar nevela. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yirmiyah b'shem Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Yirmiyah says in the name of Rabbi Chanina, Ma'isa balefnei Rebbe. This story came in front of Rebbe. V'yamar, he said, Lo kula minei meser makulan de tziporin. Just because this one story, we can't aser all the stores in Tzipori. In other words, just because you have one story where a non-Jew went in to purchase and he got basar nevela, doesn't mean that every single time we have to assume it's basar nevela. And the Gemara continues, Rav nachas letamon. Rav went down to Bavel, chamsun makilin v'chamar alein. And he saw that the people over there were being too lenient when it came to this halacha. Really, this is a halacha basar shenesalim min ha'ayin. This is a halacha of meat that we're not really watching it carefully. It's in the hands of the non-Jews. So he saw they were being too lenient, and he was strict. And the Gemara elaborates. Chad bar nosh azil. The story was that a certain person went, and we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Amud Aleph.